for consideration of H.R. 1363, the Department of Defense and Further Additional Continuing Appropriations Act of 2011. And let me say that we know that there are discussions that have taken place. The Speaker of the House, the President of the United States, our good friend Chairman Rogers, Leader Reid, Chairman Inouye have been involved in discussions, and we all are optimistic that we'll be able to avoid a shutdown of the government and at the same time effectively bring about the kinds of reductions that I know that both Democrats and Republicans alike are talking about, and I hope that we will be able to do that. So let me welcome the distinguished chair of the Committee on Appropriations and our friend, the ranking member, my fellow West Coaster, the gentleman from Seattle. So Chairman Rogers, please let me say to both of you, as always, that if you have prepared remarks without objection, they will appear in the record in their entirety, and we welcome your summary.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Madam Ranking Member and members of the committee, we're happy to be back with you again, of course.
Always happy to see you.
We're here to present H.R. 1363, the Department of Defense and Further Additional Continuing Appropriations Act of 2012. I'm here to seek a traditional rule to allow for timely consideration and passage so that we can avoid a government shutdown. It's my hope that this bill will provide the necessary time to finally complete negotiations on a bill for the rest of this fiscal year. This bill funds government operations for one more week while reducing spending by $12 billion. These cuts include funding rescissions, reductions, and program terminations from nearly all areas of the government. Virtually all of these cuts were also included in H.R. 1, and many were included in the President's budget requests, the Senate's alternative to H.R. 1 or the recent OMB CR proposal. Most importantly, the bill supports our troops and our national security by providing funding for our national defense for the remainder of the fiscal year. Our troops and their families deserve to have the financial security we promised them while we continue to work towards a final budget agreement here. After months of uncertainty, it's high time we provide for our national security in a responsible way. This means common sense funding that ensures the safety of our warfighters and the success of our missions abroad. However, while this legislation points us in the right direction on security and spending cuts, what we all want right now is to wrap up these negotiations, complete the process for 2011, and move our many other important legislative items, including the fiscal 012 bills. We've already held 107 hearings on 012 matters, and we've got to move on right away, not to mention the other matters that have to come before the Congress. As I've said many times before, short-term measures are not the preferable way to fund the government. So while no one wants to fund the government in a 1 or 2 week burst, this short-term CR is what we must do to prevent a government shutdown and allow time to pass a smart and thoughtful bill for the rest of the year. This Congress must continue down the path to fiscal solvency, and we are determined to complete this work the previous Congress failed to do. This short-term bill will allow time for the Senate to re-enter negotiations, provide responsible funding for our troops, produce real spending reductions, prevent a government shutdown, and bring this long, drawn-out saga to an end. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Dix.
We're here this evening to consider a rule for legislation that has been drafted consisting of a full-year defense appropriations bill with an attached continuing resolution that would fund the government for 1 week and which would include an exceedingly controversial District of Columbia abortion rider and nearly $12 billion in budget cuts that have never been discussed with the minority or with the Senate. Now, as the chairman, Mr. Dreyer, said, we all want to see an agreement reached, and I remain optimistic that we can reach an agreement. But I am concerned that if we were here and we were serious, we would be, and I'm going to offer a clean CR, just a straight extension without any additional cuts or without any riders, so that we can keep the government open for a few days. Now, what I had hoped for was that the negotiators in this situation would have reached an agreement on the level of cuts and on whatever riders, if any, would be accepted, and that we would be here asking for a clean CR for a few more days to wrap this up. Now, you know, we cannot, our side cannot accept the majority's position on this, and I feel that we should just have a clean CR and then tell everybody to go back to the negotiating tables and get this thing wrapped up by tomorrow at the latest. And I think if we may well be back here trying to get a clean CR, and I hope that is the outcome, because that would be far preferable, and a few days after an agreement has been reached would be, I think, a better course.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dixon. Let me say I do concur with the notion of trying to get to an agreement just as quickly as possible, and I blame Mr. Rogers for the fact that we're not there yet. So,
yeah. Hal's been doing everything he can.
Yes, I know he is, and I will tell you that I believe that that they have been working. People have been working around the clock on this. We know that, and there is a determination to get there, and we're obviously doing this because we're trying to avoid what quite possibly could happen on Friday night, and that is we don't want to see a government shutdown.
This is in nobody's interest to do this, and I just worry.
I appreciate the gentleman saying that, and I will tell you that I believe that taking this action does create an opportunity for us to make sure that Mr. Rogers, Mr. Boehner, and the others who are involved in these direct negotiations can complete their work. And frankly, I know that Mr. Rogers joins me in saying that we wish that this had been completed yesterday. But it hasn't, and that's why we're faced with the situation that we are today, and I believe that this action will do it. So thank you both very much for being here. Thanks for your hard work. I have no questions, and we're looking forward to moving this thing just as expeditiously as possible. Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of you for being here. Norm, it's good to see you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for taking time to wander up the stairs to us. I'm hopeful. I think everybody on this side of the dais is hopeful that this is going to be an opportunity for us to say to the Senate that we're trying to negotiate. Have we ever seen a volley back from them of the things we've been sending, Hal?
No, we have not. This, as you well know, this is the fourth CR that we've passed in the House. We've not received any response from the Senate body to any of these four bills. I mean,
we passed two of them, Mr. Chairman.
We are trying.
We passed two of them into law. No, but we passed CRs, two of them, which I voted for, to extend this for a brief period of time, were adopted in the House on a bipartisan basis and approved in the Senate and signed into law by the President.
But we've not seen a substantive offer from the Senate on what should be in a continuing resolution for the balance of the year. Yeah, you passed those CRs to extend the deadline, but you didn't send us a bill that told us what you wanted to cut or not cut. The Senate did not. So, you know, what else do we need to do?
So you're suggesting we're negotiating with ourselves?
Well, that's about it. So,
you know, I hate arguing with myself.
Who wins?
You know, Norm, I'm a quarterback. I threw a bunch of them, and some got intercepted.
I was a setter.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I hope that this is a good faith attempt to recognize. I would like for it to be seen that way, that we're trying to take away the piece parts, which are huge impediments in the event somebody is not able to make headway, to at least take the major things off that should be off the table, so that we can more effectively get closer to what needs to be
if I could add this.
Yes, sir.
It's altogether important, above practically anything else that I can think of, that we be sure that we have provided for the security of our armed forces in 3 wars overseas, and that we take care of the warfighters and their families. And that's what this would do for the rest of the year.
Well, I would want us to recognize 2 things. Number one, that there, as you suggest, are warfighters, men and women in the military, who get calls from home saying, we're going to bounce some checks because we didn't get paid. And, you know, somebody that's out there trying to protect this country deserves a whole lot better than that. And they're not home. They can't comfort someone. They can't provide contact that would be helpful. And I am very disturbed with that. Secondly, I think the American people are going to look up and think that, in fact, they may have been right. The people that they sent to Washington can't solve the problem and work together. And I think we ought to work together. And I think we ought to avoid a government shutdown, not at every cost, but at cost certainly where the military is involved, to where we learn more about the positions anybody takes. But I am disturbed that the Senate has not volleyed back anything to at least let us know how we can better negotiate. And so I know it's partisan. I know this is a problem. But I think adults and clear thinking should take place before we do something as silly as putting the military in the bullseye in this round. So I hope that at least we're trying to do that. We're sending a bill. We're saying what we think. That's always our prerogative. But somebody else ought to answer back. I thank the time, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Once again, we are an emergency measure. It would seem to me that we have as good a chance of getting this done in 2 days as we would in another week. But what stresses me is the $10 billion cut in this CR. $10 billion in 1 week. Obviously, what's going to be heard here is terribly important to almost everybody in the United States. And the fact of the matter is that I'm not sure whether we're simply wasting our time. On the one hand, I hear that nothing's going on in the Senate saying nothing's wrong. I don't get that impression from them. We know that they voted on the bill that you sent over there in favor. So, obviously what we're trying to do now is come up with one we will agree on.
But it got more votes than the Inouye proposal.
Whatever happened, neither one of them passed. So here we are with this. But my belief is what I'm seeing is that both houses are trying to negotiate in good faith. I have heard them say, I would not live on this, but I have heard them both say, Reid and the White House, that they would not accept another CR. And I certainly have heard everybody in this room say they want us to have another CR. Whether they're going to stick with that or not, I simply don't know. But I think some of the cuts and festooning and $12 billion, I agree with Mr. Dix. I would very much like to think we're really serious here, and we don't want to really cause more trouble. We really wanted to just get a little time here to renegotiate. We're not festoon this with issues on abortion in the District of Columbia, other things in extraneous, Gitmo. We would have passed the clean CR and gotten it over with for 1 week, if that's adequate time, and we've done it right. The way this is being presented to us today, I could never support this, and frankly, I don't think America supports this. You're still reading already about having to send mom and pa out by themselves to get health insurance instead of Medicare. So, and we've got all the figures that if H.R. 1 had passed, it would have lost 1 million jobs. We've worked so hard, I think, on a bipartisan way to try to get enough jobs built back and get back this economy. But everything we're doing here, with all this money we're cutting out of 12% of the budget, is creating more loss of jobs, more dysfunction, and we're not doing anything. We're going to have to stimulate this economy, and this entire year, this whole session, we have not had a single bill before the Rules Committee that created a job. And since that is what I believe the election was all about in November, I think we have to explain it a bit.
If I could respond to that.
To Mr. Dick's CR, which I will accept and vote for with great faith, but I was not buying his feeling.
If I could respond briefly, we wouldn't be here with you today if you last year had not refused to pass a single appropriations bill. I mean, we came into office when we took over the House in January. You had not passed any single appropriation bill out of 12 and left us with a continuing appropriation for the whole fiscal 11 year until March the 4th. And then we've passed continuing resolutions to try to keep the government operating and passed them to the Senate, and they refused to respond. I mean,
Why have we got this whole federal government in shivering fits over 5 days at a time, or 4 days at a time? We've said many times, if you're going to do one, give them 2 or 3 weeks, give us some time to get this done. We've got a shell-shocked government workforce out there that doesn't know from one day to the next whether they're going to be able to pay their bills or not. But they're just, as we used to say down in Kentucky, you and I, there are a lot of gathering around here. And this is just another chapter, another week.
well, if I could say this.
I will tell you right now that I will not be surprised. I probably be the least surprised person in the United States if we're not back here this time next week doing the very same thing over again. Only trying to take 10 or 12 million more dollars, food out of WIC programs so the children can eat, out of schools, out of education, out of hospitals, out of trying to clean up EPA sites. I would, I know you're not both just lost a big ball game, we're not in the baby room here today. But nonetheless,
Let me say this.
I'm going to see if I can find another word. I believe we'll be back here next week.
We are in negotiations, conversations with the Senate. I think they're
We
going.
won't tell you anything.
I think they're going.
You know what you said?
I think they're going. I think they're going well. I think they're going well.
That's not what I heard.
Well, maybe you've got a different source than I do.
No, I heard you. You can say all along they're not following.
Oh, what I said to you was the Senate body has not passed a bill to send back to us. We're in negotiations with the Senate now. They're going reasonably well now. But even if they concluded an arrangement, even if we concluded a deal today, there's not time to get it done before the Friday deadline. So we've got to have a few days to do the paperwork, if nothing else. So that's what this is all about.
Why not have a clean CR then? We know the president will sign that, and the president has said he will not sign this. And if we had a clean CR, we could have a few more days and reach an agreement, hopefully by the end of this week, and finish this. And I think the idea of having a clean CR is a better approach. I don't want to remind my distinguished chairman of history here, but in 2006, when the Republicans lost the House, they left, I think, of the 12 appropriation bills, I think they may have passed Defense and Milcon, but the other 10 were not passed. And I worked with Mr. Obey when he was the new chairman, and we had to put a big bill together, a big omnibus bill in 2007 to do exactly what we're trying to do here. So this isn't one party. Both parties have done this in the past. It's not right. And I hope that you and I working together can end this practice of having to do this.
Yeah.
But I think, Mr. Chairman, honestly, we'd be better off to do a clean CR, and that way we're going to get it signed. The government's not going to shut down, and we can finish the negotiations hopefully quite soon.
If you've got an unlimited time, then you've got no incentive to get it over with. I want this thing over with. And if we can't finish it by the week that we're allowed here, then there's something wrong with us.
But the problem is we run the risk of shutting down the government if the president vetoes this CR, or unless we can get to a clean CR, which he said he would sign. I think it's the better approach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had really planned to say only thank you to these gentlemen, but there have been a couple of points made here that I think have simply got to be responded to. when the chairman and Mr. Rogers both have pointed out that the reason we are here talking about a short-term continuing resolution is because our colleagues across the aisle did not do their work last year. It bears repeating. But every time that's mentioned, then suddenly our colleagues change the subject. And they want to complain about the fact that we've done a short-term CR. The subject is the Democrats did not do their jobs last year. They had the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And I think that's very important. And that they didn't do it. We're doing it. We shouldn't be in this position. The other issue, Mr. Dix, that you brought up, you've said that the president has said he will not sign this. Well, we can just add this to a long list of things that the president has said he wouldn't do that he's flip-flopped on. And I won't take a lot of time to go over those today, but there's been a good bit of discussion about that recently, and I think most people who watch these issues know the kinds of things I'm talking about.
Will the gentlelady yield to me briefly?
Yes, sir.
I don't think the president will veto a bill funding our soldiers in combat at this time or any other time.
Well, I certainly hope the president will not veto the bill that funds our troops, and I think it's extremely important that we're bringing that here and are allowing our military to be able to plan for the rest of the year. And I think it's extremely important that we're doing that. And I want to commend you for bringing this up and for the work that you've been doing. But as I said, we need to do this. We're sorry that we're having to clean up somebody else's mess, but that's what we're doing. And the quicker we all get it done, none of us want to shut down the government, but we also want to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible. And I think that passing this CR and making a total of $22 billion in cuts, well, but the $10 billion we've already cut and $12 billion in this, 10 and 12, $22 billion in total.
And the 40 that we cut before you took over. We cut $40 billion from the president's budget request. So that takes it up right there to $62 billion.
But you didn't cut a penny of actual spending.
Right.
We've cut $22 billion of actual, or will have with this passage, $22 billion of actual spending. That's
if you appropriate,
that's some 4 times the largest single rescission in the history of the country. 4 times bigger than anything we've ever done has already been done if you pass this.
And I think the people of the country are saying we're going in the right direction. It may not be as much as some people want, but we are certainly going in the right direction. And I want to commend you, Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Dix, your attitude in the past in this committee has been very positive. And I want to say thank you to you for that, too, because I do think that you and Mr. Rogers are working together very well. And we're all frustrated. I mean, all of us are frustrated over this situation. Nobody likes being in this situation. And so I want to say thank you to both of you for being here and say, along with you, I hope we'll soon have last year's spending taken care of because, as you said, Mr. Rogers, we have our work cut out for us for next year. So let's get last year's done and move on with it. We're all in favor of it on our side of the aisle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And let me just say, Mr. Dix, that Ms. Fox and I both hope that praise that we have heaped on you does not in any way undermine your standing within your caucus. Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rogers, are you asking for a straight close rule, or are you asking for a close rule plus a martial law rule on top of it?
Well, the gentleman will yield.
Happy to yield.
Well, I mean, let me just say, obviously, as you know, we on Friday are faced with the prospect of a government shutdown. And for that reason, because we're in the situation we are, it is absolutely essential that we have a modicum of flexibility. And so to have same-day authority to deal with an agreement that we hope that Mr. Rogers and Mr. Boehner and others are able to bring before us will, in fact, be allowed. And this rule will establish that opportunity. Thank my friend for yielding.
Could I make a point at this juncture? Because I think it's relevant.
Go ahead.
If you are not prepared to make a clean CR in order now, let me ask that the rule that makes H.R. 1363 in order should also provide for same-day consideration of a CR when you are ready to offer a clean CR.
Well,
that would be a way
think
of, that would be, I think, an insurance policy.
The gentleman would yield. If the gentleman would yield, I thank my friend for yielding. That's exactly what we are attempting to do here. And so the gentleman's request is exactly what we're seeking to achieve. We want to have the kind of flexibility so that the goal that the gentleman and I and a number of my colleagues have is, in fact, successfully implemented. I thank my friend for yielding.
And I guess this kind of, goes to the point that Mrs. Slaughter made with regard to whether or not this is actually the vehicle that we're going to all have to vote on. Because if it does include a martial law rule in this rule, then, we could bring up something that is actually negotiated between the House and Senate, and be able to have that vote up or down.
The gentleman further yield. Let me just say very quickly that we are going to be very specific on this so that there won't be other issues brought forward. This will be specifically to deal with the
budget
prospect of the
budget. And I
budget.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I just want to just say one thing, and this is not to be confrontational because I appreciate the work that both of you do. And look, I agree with Mr. Sessions and Ms. Fox, Dr. Fox, in saying that we need to make sure that our troops are supported. I think that's a very important thing. But when you extend the life of the Pentagon in this, the budget in the Pentagon in this bill for the remaining year, it's not just our soldiers. You're supporting every weapon system, every no-bid contract, everything within that falls under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon. And I would just simply say that, in national security means as well the health and well-being of our kids and our families here in the United States. I just came from a meeting with our former colleague, Tony Hall, who served on this committee. And he works now with the Alliance for Hunger. And he was there with Jim Wallace of Sojourners and David Beckman of Bread for the World. They're actually on a fast. There are thousands of people, 30,000 people in this country who are fasting in protest over the cuts that impact food security for kids and families here in the United States and around the world. And, the question that keeps on being asked is, why are we protecting a tax break for Donald Trump or a taxpayer-funded oil subsidy or a taxpayer-funded subsidy for corn ethanol, and then at the same time we're cutting WIC and we're cutting programs that actually help struggling families get through this difficult time. I do a lot of work on hunger. We talk about hunger. Hunger is not just an issue overseas, it's an issue here. In every single community, every congressional district, there are people who are hungry here in the United States. It's something we should be ashamed about. And I worry that we are, we all want deficit reduction, and Mr. Rogers, I agree with you. Where both sides want that. The question is where you cut, and what the human face of these cuts are. And I just want my colleagues I want to remind them that there is a human cost to what we're doing. And we're talking about this as numbers, and deficit reduction. But some of the cuts we're making, I think, are going to end up costing us a lot more in the long run. And I think there's a kind of a moral aspect to this that we're missing. And I just say that because I was very moved by the meeting that I just came from with my former colleague and with Reverend Beckman and Jim Wallace. But I'm deeply concerned that we are obliterating the social safety net in this country. We don't even talk about poor people anymore or poverty, and it's just being lost here. And I hope as we think about the 2012 budget that maybe we can go back to some of these issues because these people are falling through the cracks.
I will say one thing. We did cut some money out of the President's defense request. And this was done on a bipartisan basis, both House and Senate. And so it isn't, of the $40 billion that we took out from the President's budget request, 15 of it was defense.
Yeah.
Now, I'm with you on these other issues. Head Start, Pell Grants. You go right down the list. There's a whole series of things that are cut in this budget that should be restored. And I know that's what the Senate and the President are trying to do. And I stood on the floor, talked about the economic consequences of these cuts, but also the fact that it does undercut the social safety net. And, I mean, well, let's face it, now Mr. Ryan has laid out his budget, which makes some very dramatic changes in Medicare and Medicaid. So, you know, I think this is we're obviously seeing a trend here.
But as I've pointed out earlier, defense took a hit in this bill as well. No one is exempt. There are no sacred cows. As I recollect, the bill before you is $7 billion less than what the President requested for defense.
Well, my point was simply that national security, the definition needs to be expanded. And yes, I think it's important to make sure that our soldiers have the funding they need. And I'm not necessarily objecting to that. I'm objecting to the fact that seniors don't have what they need, and kids don't have what they need, and struggling families don't have what they need. And that should be part of the discussion of national security as well, our economic security. So I appreciate the gentleman for being here, and I yield back my time.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the issues are pretty clear here. I'm prepared to vote. I just had one question that has been developed in our discussion so far. Ms. Slaughter, I realize that you just broke your microphone. I don't know if it works. But unfortunately, you said you were in mourning because of the big game that you lost. I don't know, what did the University of Buffalo lose?
Oh, well, I'm a Kentucky graduate, and
I bet
and it was
they're
really
grateful
pretty
for that
heartbreaking.
representation.
I can tell you that they were so great when I was in school, and even after it. I was a married woman with children before I ever saw them lose a ball game, and it all came back in this tournament.
And
they did really well.
Once a cat, always a cat.
You betcha.
Right.
All right, then when we
By your accent.
then when we
No,
come
you
back
wouldn't have known I was from Kentucky, would
when
you?
we come back this summer, I expect you to be telling me about the Buffalo Bisons. Okay.
All right.
Mr. Hastings.
BYU.
Mr. Rogers, which items were added since the last negotiations on a continuing resolution that had an end date of April 8th? Which matters, or what matters in this particular one-week CR have been added?
You
I
mean
say,
the
what if
$12
any-
billion cut?
Yeah.
You're talking about the $12 billion cut?
Yeah. What, if anything, has been, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was we passed the last continuing resolution, this particular set of measures did not, as I recall, have in it a rider dealing with the District of Columbia's health issues. So is that an add to this particular matter?
The bill before you contains aid for Israel. I think it's 25 million.
That's new?
225. That's new. The cuts were taken from H.R. 1 or the President's request or the so-called NOA bill in the Senate that failed. That's where those cuts came.
And that's new. Is that new?
No, those are not new.
Is the rider on D.C. health issues new?
That was in H.R. 1.
Why then, Mr. Rogers, is it here? And why is a clean CR not better when, in fact, two people that are in the room negotiating, Majority Leader Cantor, said this with reference to the CR a week ago. We have bigger things to deal with. Time is up here. The President of the United States said yesterday, we're at a point where there's no excuse to extend this further. Now, I ask you, and I know you know, I have great respect for you as a colleague, but I have a belief that this whole matter is a non-starter in the United States Senate, if for no other reason the rider is added. So why are we doing this, is what I ask, and why couldn't we do a clean CR that would not have on it something that is ideologically controversial in our nation? And what is this obsession that Republicans have with beating up on the District of Columbia?
What's the question?
What is the reason that we have added this ideologically driven rider that is new, when in fact we could do a clean CR? And the second portion of the question is, do you believe that the United States Senate is going to take this matter up with this rider in it?
Well, I think that you'll have to ask the senators that. That's not in my province. I've long since ago gave up on the idea of fathoming some of their intent. However, this rider was in H.R. 1, among others, and that was where it came from.
All right, I'll accept what you're saying. I still believe.
And to your point, to your question about a clean CR for the rest of the year, one, if we've got until the rest of the year to clean up this mess, we'll take to the rest of the year to clean it up. That's just the way the Congress operates. We need a deadline, and we've been giving deadlines out, and the Senate has refused to respond. But this will be the final deadline.
How many deadlines have we had since the beginning of the year, Mr. Rogers?
If you do an open-ended CR to the balance of the year and put no deadline on it, we won't.
How many deadlines have we had? We're here about a deadline, April 8th. This is either our 6th or 7th deadline. Do you agree?
Waiting on the Senate to respond.
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I just wanted to inform our colleagues that we have 9 votes pending on the House floor, and I know that we obviously want everyone to have an opportunity to be heard, but
Could I just
in light of the fact that we have these
clarify
votes, I
one
just
point,
wanted to
Mr. Chairman?
Sure, of course.
My
Mr. Hastings has the
CR
time.
would be-
I thank my friend for yielding.
My
yield to
clean
Mr.
CR would have the date of April 15th, 2011. So it is not a whole year clean CR, just a week.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I hear you, and I guess your appeal is for me to wrap up. But I'm not going to, for the reason that I don't think this nation is hinging upon whether or not there are 9 votes on the House of Representatives and the Rules Committee, which can go and vote and come back, is in session or not. I'm just as the rest of us are concerned about what we're doing, and I will point it out until you and I are blue in the face if necessary. Now, understand this. This measure includes a reduction in spending by $6 billion, and then it includes a 6-month defense spending provision that could allow for boots on the ground in Libya, to put it in simple terms. And we do have one measure that I will support that says that we shouldn't use our funds to deploy or establish or maintain the presence of members of the armed services on the ground in Libya. Now, before we did this action, I've been personally on record as saying that I believe that the President should have done more consultation before the action that was undertaken, even as it pertains to the no-fly zone. I'm going to clear up something for y'all about this doctrine of relation back, particularly for the new members that haven't heard me say this. Please know this, that if it is that we are going to premise our work on the future of this nation on what happened in another Congress, specifically the 111th and the ones before that, my mom had the answer. She said that if Bill Clinton is going to say that Bush did it, and if Bush is going to say that Carter did it, and if Carter is going to say that Nixon did it, then why don't they just say George Washington did it and get it over with? You know, you can't keep looking back when you need to look forward in a nation like this. And you can cut WIC, and you can cut all of these things and save a few dollars here or there. But the real news is what you've done is add this abortion rider. And you may want to return the country to dark days and back alleys, but I don't think that that's the news that we ought to be carrying forward. What is news are the harmful effects of these cuts and the harmful effects they're going to have on the American people, effects that the Republicans have been clear that they are indifferent to. These cuts are going to drastically harm citizens who need our help the most while doing next to nothing to solve our long-term fiscal problems or reduce the deficit, evidence the fact that we are talking about billions when in fact the budget that you offered through one of the brighter persons in the Congress talking about trillions. Cutting off heat and oil doesn't really reduce the deficit, just leaves people in the cold in winter. Eliminating community development block grant programs might save a few dollars and cents here and there, but it also increases poverty and unemployment and weakens the ability of city governments to protect their communities. I've heard from countless mayors throughout this country that the CBDG block grant cuts will harm our local communities. You can save some money this year by forcing seniors to stay in their homes and students to stay out of college and cops to stay off the street and the sick to stay away from doctors' offices, but that's going to do more harm than good in the long run. Every American understands that no matter how many small rallies the Tea Party holds outside our offices, the fact is there's pain a-coming. Republicans, in my view, are taking from the poor to further enrich the wealthy, and this is another example of that. Now they also want to play political football with women's health here in Washington, D.C., not 2 blocks from this Capitol building. Come walk with me to southwest Washington. There are people struggling to make it in this difficult economy and trying to keep their jobs and keep their homes and keep their families together and keep their children in school. We need to keep the American functioning government so that Americans can be about the business of their daily lives. This is not the time to force controversial policies onto an emergency spending measure. A reporter asked me today, what did I think about the shutdown? And at this point, I know that's what all of you are saying. I say we don't need a shutdown. What we need is a shut up so that we can be on about the business of trying to do what's necessary for this nation. We shouldn't do this. We know that it ain't going nowhere in the Senate. We know that people are in this 3-stool negotiation still going on. And I got news for you. All with the exception of Harold Rogers and maybe Norm Dix sometimes, the rest of us are elected spectators to what's going on right now. And we're sitting here waiting for the other body to undertake to do what they did. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I stop only for the reason that I believe that other members do need to be heard, but don't let the votes get in the way, because we can come back. We've been doing it all the time I've been on this committee.
We certainly will, and we want to express our appreciation to our friends from the Fox News Channel who are here as well. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Polis, I know you like watching them. Mr. Polis?
Thank you. That's right. Mr. Hastings is a fan of Fox News, if I recall.
Fox. You have to know what the enemy is doing.
I don't have time to watch much television, I'm sorry to say. NP what? NPR? Thank you, gentlemen. I worry about this continuing resolution for a number of reasons. I think on the domestic discretionary front, we all agree there need to be difficult cuts. There's no doubt about that. But if we're serious about balancing the budget, and I think the CR is the first step, I really don't think that there's enough cuts in this CR. Primarily, one of the things it does is it actually increases the defense expenditures by $7.6 billion, which is 1.5% over last year's level. Now, I know that somebody said, oh, it decreases it over something else. Well, you know, decreasing the rate of increase is not a decrease, as I know many people on both sides of the aisle pointed out. You can't call it a decrease to say we're increasing it 1.5% instead of 2.9%, as might have appeared in some other budgets. So there is a $7.6 billion increase. Now, you gentlemen know defense appropriations, particularly our ranking member. and the particular ins and outs of it far more than me. So I just have a few specific questions about whether a few specific items or cuts are included in the CR, since we're just seeing it for the first time. The suggestions that I'm going to be talking about, I'm just going to go over 4 or 5 of them, are from the Simpson-Bowles defense cut suggestion list. Now, again, Simpson-Bowles recommended domestic discretionary cuts. They recommended defense cuts. They also recommended entitlement reform. They recommended revenue enhancers. Now, we are not talking here about revenue enhancers or entitlement reform. I do hope that Congress, if we're serious about handling the deficit, we absolutely need to talk about that. I think that Bowles and Simpson put something on the table that's a good point for discussion. I know Representative Ryan now has something on the table that will be something we will discuss. We're not dealing with all of those issues today. However, we are dealing with 2 pieces: domestic discretionary spending and defense spending. And what we're effectively doing in this CR as currently worded is we're completely punting on defense, increasing the funding by $7.6 billion, and only doing cuts to domestic discretionary simply doesn't add up to enough cuts. So I guess the first question is, do we end procurement of the V-22 Osprey in this particular CR?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Do we cancel the expeditionary fighting vehicle?
Yes, we end it hopefully by doing a little bit more in R&D to finish the R&D and save about $150 million in termination costs.
Excellent. And do we substitute F-16 and F-18Es for half the Air Force and Navy's planned buys of F-35s?
No, what we did is we fund we fund additional F-18s, as I understand it, for the Navy and the Marine Corps, because the Joint Strike Fighter has been pushed to the right a little bit in terms of when we're going to get it, and there's concern about having enough planes on the decks of the carriers.
And I think at least the Simpson-Bowles Commission came to the conclusion that the F-16s are cheaper and that there's also been a lot of cost overruns.
They're very old airplanes. They're not stealthy, and we need a stealthy airplane in this environment.
Have we, in the CR, do we cancel the Marine Corps version of the F-35?
No, the Secretary of Defense put it on probation for 2 years. This is a jump jet. This means a great deal to the Commandant, who I spoke to right before this meeting, and we're trying to give Lockheed a little more time to see if they can get this thing straightened out and get it to fly correctly.
2 more. Do we cancel the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, the Ground Combat Vehicle, and the Joint Tactical Radio?
I do not believe we canceled any of these.
Okay, and then the final one, do we reduce military personnel stationed in Europe and Asia by 1/3, or by any amount? Okay, yes.
Checking my staff.
JLTV.
Sure, right. Which one?
Do we reduce our military personnel stationed in Europe or Asia? The Commission suggested 1/3, but do we reduce our military personnel in Europe or Asia at all under the CR?
Well, I know that we have, over the years here, shut down some of our base facilities and returned some people home. Whether we did it in this bill, I don't think so.
Okay. Those are some of, I think, and I don't want to say to either of you that this is low-hanging fruit. We all know these cuts are difficult, and I know that the military can make arguments that they need this or that, just as people on this panel are making arguments that the poor need this, the poor need that. We need things. We need, but we.
Let me just make one
yes,
point
Mr. Dix,
to make you feel better. Secretary Gates has suggested about $73 billion in cuts that can be made, and he has made hard decisions to make those cuts, and $100 billion in taking money that the services have given up and using it for modernization and other things that would have had to be funded anyway. So there is some savings there, but there is no question in my mind. We have got it. We can scrub the defense budget, and it should be part. And as the chairman's done this, it should be part of any look at reduction in spending. Defense should not be off the table. And I've been pleased that Speaker Boehner and the majority leader and everybody else, basically, except a few of the committee leaders, have said that defense should be looked at. I think it should be too.
And in fact, as I said earlier, we cut 3% off of the President's request for defense, so it has been cut.
Well, no, you're arguing, Mr. Rogers, and I know you've argued the contrary on other occasions, that you're saying decreasing the rate of increase is a decrease. And,
I didn't say that. I said we cut the President's request.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually cut his request
by
3%.
Yes, in absolute dollars, we're increasing, just to be clear, the CR increases the defense budget by 1.5%. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I also thank you, Mr. Dix, as well. And I applaud Secretary Gates, by the way, for identifying those savings. And what the Bull-Simpson Commission recommends, and I think will ultimately necessary, is, again, we will need to apply those savings to deficit reduction. Despite our desires to spend it on modernization and keep it within the military, again, we are effectively spending money we don't have on these matters. I believe we're reducing our security by spending money we don't have and making ourselves economically beholden to foreign powers. And I just want to ask Mr. Rogers if he would be open to using the savings that Secretary Gates has identified to reduce the deficit.
We'll certainly take a look at it. Mr. Speaker, Chairman, are we going to go vote on the floor?
Well, how many people haven't voted yet?
How much time do we have?
About 200 people haven't voted yet. If Mr. Polis, you completed your questions, Mr. Polis?
Nearly done. Yeah, I'm nearly done.
Okay.
I'll just be finishing here. So, did the gentleman say he would look at it?
Yes,
consider
he said
it?
he'd look at
Okay,
it.
yeah, thank you. So, I think reasonable military spending reductions without sacrificing national security need to be made. Again, I think that it's very hard to argue that a 1.5% increase is somehow a decrease, as I think Mr. Rogers argued. Yes, it might be below what other people want to spend, and fine. But I think, unfortunately, what will be necessary here, if we're serious about addressing this deficit crisis, is looking at all of the ways of addressing it, which is domestic discretionary, defense, revenues, entitlements. We look at domestic discretionary, we do something there. That's a good thing. However, we increase defense spending by 1.7%. And that's not something that I can support at this time.
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Mr. Scott. Mr. Webster. Mr. Reed. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. We will make the votes, and let me say we have 2-minute votes. We want to hear from our colleague Eleanor Holmes Norton. I personally am willing to proceed with her testimony. I mean, gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Ms. Holmes Norton, if you'd like to come before us and proceed with your testimony, we certainly welcome it. Without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety. And
if I could have a moment, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put the record of Representative John Conyers.
Without objection, Mr. Conyers' statement will appear in the record. Ms. Holmes Norton, please
I appreciate
proceed.
your hearing me because I know you're running to a vote, and I know we all agree we ought to stop meeting like this. I'm here because I'd like to have the District of Columbia drop out of this federal struggle. I'll be here tomorrow on H.R. 3, which federalizes the district for abortion purposes. I'm asking two things. That you note that you have only 2 riders. This is the first of the CRs to have any rider. It was very important that the previous CRs had no riders. Now we come up for the first time with not 1 but 2, and I must tell you the residents of the District of Columbia are particularly outraged to find that we are paired with Guantanamo. It just seems all too contemptuous. Bring the troops home from Guantanamo, and while you're at it, use the District of Columbia also as a bargaining chip, again involving only our own money for abortions for low-income women. I'm asking that rider be stricken because it violates the district right to self-government. Congress granted us that right in 1974. And I would appreciate your respecting it. When I have been here before to ask that the district be able to spend its own funds for local money, its own local funds, you have effectively said, well, it's really moot because we're not going to close down the government. I just want to say to the committee, I have had to go to a press conference of the District of Columbia today where he laid out the parts of the District of Columbia that would have to close down if the federal government closes down. I'm asking that you use this 1-week CR to let my people go, if you'll forgive me, so that we can spend our own local funds for the rest of the year. I mean, it was just quite pitiful to hear the mayor of a complicated big city indicate, and he has laid out, it's on our website, what parts of the District of Columbia will be shut down if the federal government shuts down. Now, I respect my good colleague, the chairman, who has said not to worry, 48 hours though. from now, everybody's preparing for a shutdown. All of us have received guidance from the Committee on Administration. We've all decided or should be deciding now which of our employees are essential and which are not. I know I have decided. I don't think anyone can say with any confidence now that there will not be a shutdown. Since you can't say that about the federal government in this federal fight, I ask you to let the District of Columbia go. Include in this CR a provision that says that the district may spend its own local funds for the rest of the year, and I would very much appreciate your making this, whatever you intend to put in this CR, not including us in a short-term CR. For the first time, you have been very good in keeping all the riders out. Please don't use us, allow anyone to use us as a bargaining chip during the struggle.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Holmstrom. We always appreciate having you here, and you have a very strong and consistent message, and we appreciate that. Mr. Sessions?
Mr. Chairman, I have no questions. I want to thank the gentlewoman for coming out.
Mr. Hastings?
Mr. Sessions, may I say I enjoyed talking with your mother, whom I sat beside at the arena the other night.
Ms. Fox?
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Bishop? Mr. Nugent? Mr. Scott? Mr. Webster? Mr. Reed? Thank you very much.
Thank
for
you very
being here,
kindly,
Ms.
Mr.
Holmstrom.
Chairman.
We appreciate that. That will conclude the hearing portion for consideration of the measure, and I understand that our colleagues have another number of motions that they would like to offer to the rule. So it seems to me, in light of the fact that we're going to have a series of 8 two-minute votes on the floor, that what we should do is recess, and we will reconvene for the markup of this rule at the beginning of the last of the series of 2-minute votes. And so we'll try to come up just as soon as we can at the beginning of the last vote. Thank you all very much. The committee stands in recess.
2, 1. Testing, testing, 1, 2. Sure. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, sir.
Okay, so everything's going from over there.
Yeah, everything is on that side. The only thing we need is your cube. Okay?
Thank you for your help.
You're welcome.
Of H.R. 1363, and the chair will be in receipt of a motion. The gentleman from the Big D.
A little bit of assistance tonight, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 1363, the Department of Defense, and further additional Continuing Appropriations Act 2011 a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member on the Committee on Appropriations. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule provides that a bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Rule provides one motion to recommit. Finally, the rule waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 requiring a two-thirds vote to consider a rule on the same day it is reported from the Rules Committee with respect to any resolution reported before April 11, 2011, providing for consideration or disposition of a measure making or continuing appropriations for fiscal year ending September 30, 2011.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. I think we've had an exhaustive, thorough discussion of the rule and why it is that we're here, and we want to proceed. And our goal is to ensure that we don't have a government shutdown and make sure that our men and women in uniform have all of the resources that they need to do their job and ensure for our security. And are there any amendments? Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Conyers, number 2, which would state that no funds in the Act may be used to deploy, establish, or maintain the presence of members of the armed forces or private security contractors on the ground in Libya for the purposes of engaging in ground combat operations.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. It's self-explanatory. Vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Reed? No. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter is here.
Oh.
We didn't know you were here, Louise.
Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Where's my microphone?
Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No. The clerk reports total, and the motion is not agreed to. The further amendments, Mrs. Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter has an amendment here.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers.
Make sure this microphone is on. Do we want to test this out before I kick it again? Or
I got my eye on you.
okay.
The necessary waivers for the amendment in the nature of a substitute by Mr. Dix, number 1, which is a clean 1-week CR, which is not cluttered up with extraneous matter.
Thank you very much.
Ask for an aye.
You've heard the motion of the gentlewoman. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the Slaughter amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The the chair, the noes have
Roll
it.
call.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions? Nope. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Reed? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No. Clerk reports total, and the motion is not agreed to. The further amendments, Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule, and I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Ms. Norton, number 3, which would permit the District of Columbia government to spend its local taxpayer-raised funds on abortions for low-income women.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. The vote occurs on the Hastings amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion share, the noes have it. The noes have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Sessions? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Reed? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman?
No. And the clerk reports total, and the motion is not agreed to. There are further amendments. Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Ms. Lee, number 5, which would end combat operations in Afghanistan and limit funding to the safe, orderly redeployment of all U.S. troops and military contractors.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Any further discussion? If not, the vote occurs on the Polis amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Roll call vote, Mr. Chair.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions? No. Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Woodall? No. Mr. Nugent? No. Mr. Scott? No. Mr. Webster? No. Mr. Reed? No. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern? Aye. Mr. Hastings? Aye. Mr. Polis? Aye. Mr. Chairman?
No. And the clerk reports total,
48-9.
and the motion is not agreed to. There are further amendments. If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mr. Mrs. Fox will be handling for the majority, and Mr. McGovern for the minority. Well, thank you all very much. Let's hope very much that we are able to avoid a government shutdown and that we'll be able to come together tomorrow with, I hope, an agreement with the President of the United States and the Leader of the Senate and our Speaker as well. So without objection, the committee stands adjourned.